What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to back down from asking the hard questions, and a former royal decides she's had enough of being challenged? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits across from Tamron Hall in what was supposed to be a promotional appearance that turned into an explosive confrontation that left everyone in the studio stunned. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of the Tamron Hall show was supposed to showcase Meghan Markle discussing her latest charitable initiatives and upcoming projects. What viewers witnessed instead was a masterclass in tension, as two strong personalities clashed in ways nobody saw coming. From the moment Meghan walked onto that set, something felt different. The usual warm atmosphere that Tamron Hall is known for creating seemed charged with an underlying current of unease. The trouble began almost immediately after the pleasantries ended. Tamron, known for her direct but respectful interviewing style, started with what seemed like a straightforward question about Meghan's recent public statements regarding privacy and media intrusion. "Meghan, you've spoken extensively about wanting privacy for your family, yet you continue to do high-profile interviews and maintain a significant media presence. How do you reconcile these seemingly contradictory positions?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Meghan's demeanor shifted visibly. Her carefully composed smile faltered for just a moment, before she responded with an edge to her voice that hadn't been there moments before. "I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what privacy means, Tamron. Choosing when and how to share your story is not the same as seeking constant media attention." But Tamron wasn't backing down. With the professionalism that has made her a trusted voice in journalism, she pressed further. "But critics argue that you can't have it both ways. You've done multiple tell-all interviews, written books, produced content, all while claiming to want privacy. Doesn't that seem contradictory to the average person watching at home?" The atmosphere in the studio grew noticeably tenser as Meghan's posture became more defensive. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and her voice took on a sharper tone. "I find it interesting that I'm constantly questioned about my choices in ways that other public figures aren't. There seems to be a different standard applied to me, and I think we both know why that island." Tamron, recognizing the implication but refusing to let it derail the conversation, responded with measured professionalism. "Meghan, I ask tough questions of all my guests regardless of their background. That's what journalism is about. If you're suggesting there's bias in my questioning, I'd invite you to watch any of my other interviews." The tension was becoming palpable to everyone in the studio. Crew members exchanged glances as the conversation took on an increasingly confrontational tone. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her voice rising just enough to signal her growing irritation. "I'm not here to be attacked or to defend every decision I've made. I came here to discuss positive work, not to be put on trial." Without missing a beat, Tamron maintained her composure while addressing the accusation head-on. "Nobody's attacking you, Meghan. These are legitimate questions that many people have. If discussing your public statements and actions feels like an attack, perhaps that says something about the statements themselves." The exchange was becoming more heated by the minute, and viewers could sense that something significant was building. Meghan's carefully constructed public persona was beginning to crack under the pressure of Tamron's persistent questioning. Her voice became more strained as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. "I think what's happening here is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me and my family away from public life in the first place. The constant scrutiny, the impossible standards, the refusal to accept that I have the right to tell my own story on my own terms." Tamron, however, wasn't allowing the conversation to be redirected away from her original point. With the skill of a veteran journalist, she brought the focus back to the core issue. "But that's exactly what I'm talking about, Meghan. You say you were driven away from public life, yet here you are, very much in public life, doing interviews, making statements, influencing public opinion. The inconsistency is what people are questioning." The studio audience, who had been watching this exchange with growing fascination, could feel the electricity in the air. This was no longer a typical celebrity interview. It had transformed into something much more raw and real. Meghan's frustration was becoming increasingly evident as she struggled to maintain her composure while facing questions she clearly hadn't expected or prepared for. "You know what, Tamron? I don't think you understand what it's like to have every word you say twisted, every action scrutinized, every motive questioned. It's easy to sit there and judge when you haven't lived through what I've experienced. But Tamron, drawing on her years of experience handling difficult interviews, remained unflappable. I absolutely understand difficult situations and unfair treatment, Meghan. But what I'm asking about isn't your treatment by others. It's about the consistency of your own messages and actions. That's a fair topic for discussion. The confrontation reached a new level of intensity as Meghan's voice began to crack slightly, revealing the emotional strain she was under. This is exactly the kind of hostile environment that I've been talking about. I came here expecting a respectful conversation, not an interrogation designed to make me look bad. Tamron's response was swift and professional, but with an underlying firmness that showed she wouldn't be intimidated. Meghan, asking follow-up questions and seeking clarification isn't hostile. It's journalism. If you're uncomfortable with that level of scrutiny, then perhaps public appearances aren't the right choice. The comment struck a nerve, and Meghan's carefully maintained composure finally began to shatter completely. Her voice rose noticeably as she shot back. Are you seriously suggesting that I shouldn't do interviews because I won't accept unfair questioning? That's exactly the kind of silencing that I've been fighting against. The studio was now completely silent except for the voices of the two women engaged in this increasingly intense battle of wills. Even the usually active studio audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary and potentially explosive. Tamron, recognizing that the interview had reached a critical juncture, made one final attempt to bring some professional balance to the conversation. I'm not trying to silence anyone, Meghan. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about public statements and actions. That's what my audience expects, and it's what responsible journalism requires. But Meghan had clearly reached her breaking point. Her face flushed with anger and frustration. She stood up abruptly from her chair, her voice now carrying a tone of finality and indignation. You know what? I don't need to sit here and be treated this way. This is exactly the kind of behavior that creates toxic environments, and I won't be part of it. The studio erupted into a shocked silence as Meghan began removing her microphone with shaking hands. Tamron, maintaining her professionalism even in this extraordinary moment, attempted to salvage the situation. Meghan, please sit down. We can continue this conversation in a respectful way. But Meghan was beyond reconciliation at this point. Her voice carried across the studio with unmistakable anger as she declared, "No, we can't. This interview is over." With that, she turned her back on Tamron, the studio audience, and the cameras, walking off the set with determined steps while her security team quickly moved to escort her out. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene as Tamron sat in her chair, professional to the end, addressing her audience with remarkable composure. Well, that certainly wasn't what anyone expected tonight. The aftermath in the studio was electric with shock and disbelief, as crew members and audience members tried to process what they had just witnessed. What had started as a standard celebrity interview had transformed into one of the most dramatic walk-offs in recent talk show history, leaving everyone wondering what had really caused Meghan to reach such a breaking point over questions that many would consider standard for any public figure.